Hi guys, it's Summer at Mojy's Corner, and today we'll be reading Magyk by Angie. It's honestly one of my personal favorite books. Today, joining us, we have Chance, my dog. You can't see him because he's laying down, and Mojy, whose corner this is. And you may hear some scuffling. It's from Mojy. Okay. Chapter 1. Something in the Snow. Septimus Heap pulled his cloak tightly around him against the snow. It had been a long walk through the forest, and he was chilled to the bone. But in his pockets he had the herbs that Galen, the physic woman, had given him for his new baby boy, Septimus, who had been born earlier that day. Septimus drew closer to the castle, and he could see the lights flickering through the trees as candles were placed in the windows of the tall, narrow houses clustered along the outside walls. It was the longest night of the year, and the candles would be kept burning until dawn to help keep the dark at bay. Septimus always loved this walk to the castle. He had no fear of the forest by day, and enjoyed the peaceful walk along the narrow track that threaded its way through the dense trees for mile after mile. He was near the edge of the forest now. The tall trees had begun to thin out, and as the track began to dip through the valley floor, Septimus could see the whole castle spread before him. The old walls hugged the wide, winding river, and they zigzagged around the higgledy-piggledy clumps of houses. All the houses were painted bright colors, and those that faced west looked as though they were on fire as their windows caught the last of the winter sun's rays. The castle had started life as a small village. Being so near to the forest, the villagers had put up some tall stone walls for protection against the wolverines, witches, and warlocks who thought nothing of stealing their sheep, chickens, and occasionally their children. As more houses were built, the walls were extended and a deep moat was dug so all could feel safe. Soon the castle was attracting skilled craftsmen from other villages. It grew and prospered, so much so that the inhabitants began to run out of space until someone decided to build the Ramblings. The Ramblings, which was where Septimus, Sarah, and the boys lived, was a huge stone building that rose up along the riverside. It sprawled for 3 miles along the river and back again into the castle, and it was a noisy, busy place filled with a warren of passages, rooms with small factories, schools, and shops mixed in with family rooms, tiny roofed gardens, and even a theater. There was not much space in the Ramblings, but people did not mind. There was always good company and someone for the children to play with. As the winter sun sank below the castle walls, Septimus quickened his pace. He needed to get to the northern gate before they locked it and pulled up the drawbridge at night. It was then that Septimus sensed something nearby, something alive, but only just. He was aware of a small human heartbeat somewhere close to him. Septimus stopped. As an ordinary wizard, he was able to sense things, but as he was a not particularly good ordinary wizard, he needed to concentrate hard. He stood still with the snow falling fast around him, already covering his footprints. Then he heard something. A snuffle, a whimper, a small breath. He wasn't sure, but it was enough. Underneath a bush beside the path was a bundle. Septimus picked up the bundle and, to his amazement, found himself gazing into the solemn eyes of a tiny baby. Septimus cradled the baby in his arms and wondered how she had come to be lying in the snow on the coldest day of the year. Someone had wrapped her tightly in a heavy woolen blanket, but she was already very cold. Her lips were a dusky blue, and the snow dusted her lashes. As the baby's dark violet eyes gazed intently at him, Septimus had the uncomfortable feeling that she'd already seen things in her short life that no baby should see. Thinking of his Sarah at home, warm and safe with Septimus and the boys, Septimus decided that they would just have to make room for one more little one. He carefully tucked the baby into his blue wizard cloak and held her close to him as he ran towards the castle gate. He reached the drawbridge just as Gringe, the gatekeeper, was about to go and yell for the bridge boy to start winding it up. "You're cutting it a big fine," growled Gringe. "But you wizards are weird. What do y'all want to be out for on a day like this? I don't know." "Oh?" Septimus wanted to get past Gringe as soon as he could, but first he had to cross Gringe's palm with silver. Septimus quickly found a silver penny in one of his pockets and handed it over. Thank you, Gringe. Good night. Gringe looked at the penny as though it were rather a nasty beetle. Marcia overstand she gave me a half-crown just now, but then she's got class, what with her being the extraordinary wizard now. What? Silas nearly choked. Yeah, class, that's what she's got. Gringe stood back to let him pass, and Silas slid by. As much as Silas wanted to find out why Marcia Overstrand was suddenly the extraordinary wizard, he could feel the bundle beginning to stir in the warmth of his cloak, and something told him that it would be better if Grinch did not know about the baby. As Silas disappeared into the shadows of the tunnel that led to the ramblings, a tall figure in purple stepped out and barred his way. Marcia, gasped Silas, what on earth? Tell no one you found her. She was born to you. Understand? Shocked, Silas nodded. Before he had time to say anything, Marcia was gone in a shimmer of purple mist. Silas spent the rest of the long, winding journey through the ramblings with his mind in turmoil. Who was this baby? What did Marcia have to do with her? And why was Marcia the extraordinary wizard now? And as Silas neared the big red door that led to the Heap's already overcrowded room, another, more pressing question came to his mind. What was Sarah going to say to yet another baby to care for? Silas did not have to think long about the last question. As he reached the door, it flew open. A large, red-faced woman wearing the dark blue robes of a matron midwife ran out, almost knocking Silas over as she fled. She, too, was carrying a bundle. The bundle was wrapped from head to toe in bandages, and she was carrying him under her arm as if he were a parcel and she was late for the post. "Dead!" cried the matron midwife. She pushed Silas aside with a powerful shove and ran down the corridor. Inside the room, Sarah Heap screamed. Silas went in with a heavy heart. He saw Sarah surrounded by 6 white-faced little boys, all too scared to cry. "She's taken him," Sarah said hopelessly. "Septimus is dead, and she's taken him away." At that moment, a warm wetness spread out from the bundle that Silas still had hidden under his cloak. He had no words for what he wanted to say, so he just took out the bundle from under his cloak and placed her into Sarah Heap's arms. Sarah Heap burst into tears. Chapter 2. Sarah and Silas. The bundle settled down into the Heap household and was called Jenna after Silas's mother. The youngest of the boys, Nico, was only 2 when Jenna arrived, and he soon forgot about his brother Septimus. The older boys slowly forgot too. They loved their little baby sister and brought home all kinds of treasures for her from their magic classes at school. Sarah and Silas, of course, could not forget Septimus. Silas blamed himself for leaving Sarah alone while he went out to fetch the baby herbs from the physic woman. Sarah just blamed herself for everything, although she could hardly remember what happened that terrible day. Sarah knew she had tried to breathe life back into the baby and had failed, and she remembered watching the matron midwife wrapping her little Septimus from head to toe in bandages and then running for the door, shouting over her shoulder, "Dead!" Sarah remembered that all right. But soon Sarah loved her little baby girl as much as she had loved her Septimus. For a while, she too was afraid that someone would come and take Jenna away. But as the months passed and Jenna grew into a chubby, gurgling baby, Sarah relaxed and almost stopped worrying. Until one day when her best friend, Sally Mullen, arrived breathless on the doorstep. Sally Mullen was one of those people who knew everything that was going on at the castle. She was a small, busy woman with wispy ginger hair that was forever escaping from her somewhat grubby cook's hat. She had a pleasant round face, a little chubby from finishing off too many cakes, and her clothes were generally covered in sprinkles of flour. Sally ran a small cafe down the pontoon beside the river. The sign over the door announced, "The Sally Mullen Tea and Ale House. Clean accommodation available, no riffraff." There were no secrets in Sally Mullen's cafe. Anything and everyone arrived at the castle by water was noticed and commented on, and most people coming to the castle did prefer to arrive by boat. No one apart from Silas liked the dark tracks through the forest that surrounded the castle. The forest still had a bad wolverine problem at night and was infested with carnivorous trees. Then there were the Wendron witches, who were always short of cash and had been known to set traps for the unwary traveler and leave them with a little more than their shirt and socks. Sally Mullen's cafe was a busy, steaming hut perched precariously over the water. All shapes and sizes of boats would moor up at the cafe pontoon, and all sorts of people and animals would tumble out of them. Most decided to recover from their trip by having at least one of Sally's fierce beers and a slab of barley cake, and by telling the latest gossip. And to anyone in the castle with half an hour to spare and a rumbling tummy would soon find themselves on the well-trodden path down to the port gate, past the riverside amenities rubbish dump, and along the pontoon to Sally Mullen's tea and ale house. Sally made it her business to see Sarah every week and keep her up to date with everything. In Sally's opinion, Sarah was much put upon with 7 children to care for, not to mention Septimus Heap, who did very little as far as she could see. Sally's stories usually involved people Sarah had never heard of and would never meet. But Sarah looked forward to Sally's visits all the same, and enjoyed hearing about what was going on around her. However, this time, what Sally had to tell her was different. This was more serious than everyday gossip, and this time it did involve Sarah. And, for the first time ever, Sarah knew something about it that Sally did not. Sally Swanton closed the door conspiratorially behind her. "I've got some terrible news," she whispered. Sarah, who was trying to wipe breakfast from Jenna's face and everywhere else that the baby had sprayed it, and clean up after a new wolfhound puppy all at the same time, was not really listening. "Hello, Sally," she said. "There's a clean space here. Come and sit down. Cup of tea?" "Yes, please." "Sarah, can you believe this?" "What's that then, Sally?" asked Sarah, expecting to hear about the latest bad behavior in the cafe. The queen is dead." "What?" gasped Sarah. She lifted Jenna out of her chair and took her over to the corner where her baby basket was. Sarah laid Jenna down for a nap. She believed that babies should be kept well away from bad news. "Dead," repeated Sally unhappily. "No," gasped Sarah. "I don't believe it. She was just not well enough after her baby's birth. That's why she's not been seen since then." "That's what the custodian guards have been saying, is it?" asked Sally. "Well, yes," admitted Sarah, pouring out the tea. "But they are her bodyguards, so they must know. Though why the queen had suddenly chosen to be guarded by a bunch of thugs, I don't understand." Sally took the cup of tea that Sarah had placed in front of her. Lovely. "Well, exactly." Sally lowered her voice and looked around as though expecting to find a custodian guard propped up in the corner. Not that she was necessarily would have noticed amid all of the mess in the Heaps' room. They are a bunch of thugs. In fact, they're the ones who killed her." "Killed? She was killed?" exclaimed Sarah. "Shh. Well, see here." Sally pulled her chair closer to Sarah. "There's a story going around, and I have it from the horse's mouth." "Which horse would that be, then?" asked Sarah with a wry smile. "Only Madame Marcia." Looking triumphant, Sally sat back and folded her arms. "That's who." "What? How come you've been mixing with the extraordinary wizard? Did she drop by for a cup of tea?" "Almost. Terry Tercel did. He had been up at the wizard tower delivering some really weird shoes that he had made for Madame Marcia. So when he had stopped moaning about her taste in shoes and how much he hated snakes, he said that he had overheard Marcia talking to one of the other wizards, or that little fat one, I think. Well, they said that the queen had been shot by the custodian guards, one of their assassins." Sarah could not believe what she was hearing. "When?" she breathed. "Well, this is a really awful thing," whispered Sally excitedly. "They said she was shot on the day her baby was born, 6 whole months ago. And we know nothing about it. It's terrible, terrible. And they shot Mr. Arthur too, dead. That's how come Marcia took over." "Arthur's dead?" gasped Sarah. "I can't believe it. I really can't. We all thought he'd retired. Celia was his apprentice years ago. He was lovely." "Was he?" asked Sally vaguely, eager to get up on the story. "Well, that's not all. See, because Terry reckoned that Marcia had rescued the princess and had taken her away somewhere. Ender and Marcia were just chatting, really, wondering how she was getting along. But, of course, they stopped. They realized Terry was there with the shoes. They stopped. Marcia was very rude to him, he said. He felt a bit strange afterwards, and he reckoned she'd done a forget spell on him, but he nipped behind a pillar when he saw her muttering, and it didn't take properly. He's really upset about the fact that he can't remember whether she paid him for the shoes or not." Sally Mullen paused to draw a few breaths and have a large gulp of tea. That poor little princess. God help the little one. I wonder where she is now. Probably wasting away in some dungeon somewhere. Not like your little angel over there. How is she doing? Oh, she's just fine, said Sarah, who usually would have talked at length about Jenna's snuffles and new tooth, and how she could sit up and hold her cup now. But just at that moment, Sarah wanted to turn attention away from Jenna, because Sarah had spent the last 6 months wondering who her baby really was. And now she knew. Jenna was, thought Sarah. Surely she must be the baby princess. For once, Sarah was glad to wave goodbye to Sally Mullen. She watched her bustle off down the corridor, and as Sarah closed the door behind her, she breathed a sigh of relief. Then she rushed over to Jenna's basket. Sarah lifted Jenna up and held her in her arms. Jenna smiled at Sarah and reached out to grab her charm necklace. Well, little princess, muttered Sarah, I always knew you were special, but I never dreamed you were our own princess. The baby's dark violet eyes met Sarah's gaze, and she looked solemnly at Sarah as if to say, well, now you know. Sarah gently laid Jenna back in her baby basket. Her head was spinning, and her hands shook as she poured herself another cup of tea. She found it hard to believe that all she had heard, the queen was dead, and Arthur too. Their Jenna was the heiress of the castle, the princess? What was happening? Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon torn between gazing at Jenna, Princess Jenna, and wondering about what would happen if anyone found out where she was. Where was Silas when he needed them? Silas was enjoying a day's fishing with the boys. There was a small sandy beach in the bend of the river just along the ramblings. Silas was showering Nico and Jojo. The 2 youngest boys had to tie their jam jars onto the end of the pole and dip them into water. Jojo had already caught 3 tiddlers, but Nico kept dropping his and was getting upset. Silas picked Nico up and took him over to see Eric and Ed, the 5-year-old twins. Eric was daydreaming happily and dangling his foot in the worn, clear water. Ed was poking at something under a stone with a stick. It was a huge water beetle. Nico wailed and clung tightly around Silas's neck. Sam, who was nearly 7, was a serious fisherman. He had been given a proper fishing rod for his last birthday. There were 2 small silver fish laid out on the rock beside him, and he was about to reel in another. Nico squealed with excitement. Take him away, Dad. He'll frighten the fish, Sam said crossly. Silas tiptoed off with Nico and went to sit beside his oldest son, Simon. Simon had a fishing rod in one hand and a book in the other. It was Simon's ambition to be the extraordinary wizard, and he was busy reading all of Silas's old magic books. This one, Silas noted, was called The Complete Fish Charmer. Silas expected all his boys to be some kind of wizard. It was in the family. Silas's aunt was the renowned White Witch, and both Silas's father and uncle had been shapeshifters, which were a very specialized branch, and one that Silas hoped his boys would avoid, for successful shapeshifters became increasingly unstable as they grew older, sometimes unable to hold their own shape for more than a few minutes at a time. Silas's father had eventually disappeared into the forest as a tree, but no one knew which one. It was one of the reasons why Silas enjoyed his walks through the forest. He would often address a remark to an untidy-looking tree in hopes that it might be his father. Septimus Heap came from a warlock and wizard family. As a girl, Sarah Heap came from a warlock and wizard family. As a girl, Sarah had studied herbs and healing with Galen, the physic woman in the forest, which was where she had met Silas one day. Silas had been out looking for his father. He was lost and unhappy. Sarah took him back with her to see Galen. Galen had helped Silas to understand that his father, as a shapeshifter, would have chosen his final destination as a tree many years ago, and would now be truly happy. Silas, too, for the first time in his life, realized he felt truly happy sitting next to Sarah by the physic woman's fire. When Sarah understood all she could about herbs and healing, she said a fond goodbye to Galen and joined Silas in his room in the Ramblings, and there they had stayed ever since, squeezing in more and more children, while Silas happily gave up his apprenticeship and worked as a jobbing, ordinary wizard to pay the bills. Sarah made herb tinctures in the kitchen table when she had a spare moment. which did not often happen. That evening, as Silas and the boys made their way up the beach steps back to the Ramblings, a large and menacing custodian guardian dressed in black from head to toe barred their way. "Halt!" he barked. Nico started to cry. Silas stopped and told the boys to behave. "Papers!" shouted the guard. "Where are your papers?" Silas stared at him. "What papers?" he asked quietly, not wanting to cause trouble with 6 tired boys around him needing to go home for supper. "Your papers, wizard scum. This beach area is forbidden to all without the required papers," sneered the guard. Silas was shocked. If he had not been with the boys, he would have argued, but he noticed the pistol that the guard was carrying. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know." The guard looked them all up and down, if deciding what to do, but luckily for Silas, he had other people to go and terrorize. "Take your rabble out of here and don't come back," snapped the guard. "Stay where you belong." Silas hurried the shocked boys away from the steps and into the safety of the Ramblings. Sam dropped his fish and started to sob. There, said Silas. "It's all right." But Silas felt as though things were certainly not all right. "What's going on?" "Why did he call us wizard scum, Dad?" asked Simon. "Wizards are the best, aren't they?" "Yes," said Silas distractedly, "the best. But the trouble was," thought Silas, "there was no hiding it if you were a wizard. All wizards, and only wizards, had them. Silas had them, Sarah had them, and all the boys except Nico and Jojo had them. As soon as Nico and Jojo went to the magic class at school, they would have them too. Slowly but surely, until there was no mistaking it, a wizard child's eyes would turn green when he or she was exposed to magic learning. It had always been something to be proud of until now, when it suddenly felt dangerous. That evening, when at long last all the children were asleep, Silas and Sarah talked late into the night. They talked about their princess and their wizard boys, and the changes that had overtaken the castle. They discussed escaping to the Marram marshes, or going into the forest and living with Galen. By the time dawn broke and at last they fell asleep, Silas and Sarah had decided to do what the Heaps usually did, muddle through and hope for the best. And so, for the next 9.5 years, Silas and Sarah kept quiet. They locked and barred their door. They spoke to only their neighbors and those they could trust. When the magic classes were stopped at school, they taught the children magic at home in the evenings. And that is why, 9.5 years later, all the Heaps except one had piercing green eyes. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you like that, and we'll start chapter 3 tomorrow.